Check them out.
Got it.
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 Check them out.
Got it. What up, though? AAS 477, week 9, regulators, 94 to 1995. Um, Excited to get into the material today. So much to talk about. But before we do that, I want to take a moment to have a moment of um, just realness here. Earlier this week, the Supreme Court, in the case Louisiana versus Calais, overturned a key provision in Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act, which basically guts the provisions in Section 2 that allows for um, oversight and using the law to make right the wrongs of the past, and you know, really putting a nail in the coffin of the provision that made sure that the Voting Rights Act was as powerful as it needed to be. I was out of town this week at a conference, and I saw it, and it hit me very, very hard. It hurt me very, very bad to my core. And just 2 semesters ago, if you've been with me, we talked about civil rights movement. We talked about the Voting Rights Act and the many acts of everyday people who stepped out of their comfort, who stepped out of their role and opportunity in society and really put their life, their limbs, their freedom on the line for access to the right to vote. We talked about the Freedom Riders that went down south. We talked about the Selma March. We talked about all the local people who will never remember their name, who, from teenagers to college students to professionals to janitors to you name them, who put their life, their limbs, their freedom on the line for the ability to participate in democracy. And to see that taken away with the swipe of a pen by the Supreme Court, who at one time was, a body that we could look up to and look and expect things from. It's been very hard for me personally. The chatter I've been seeing online has been in a couple different ways. One, we told you so, which the people who we're trying to tell everyone, we got to take this a lot more serious. We got to keep our feet to the fire, and freedom and rights are earned every single day. They're getting their chance to say, well, we told you so, we told you so. I don't know what good that is, but that's what I've been seeing. I've been seeing another side of people who simply don't care, who care more about an athlete and an entertainer breaking up, and writing think pieces on that, while the right to vote is being taken away. I've also seen people look to kind of solve the problem by embracing this red wave that they want to see coming, and I don't understand that at all. Um, and then there's people like me that's saying, okay, well, what can we do to use our power the same way our heroes from the civil rights movement were able to do there? Um, I want to be the first to offer my services for Saturday school. I think that's the number one thing we need. We need to go back, like I've been doing with this class, and um, relitigate our history so we know how to take these problems on. I also think we need an effort to build a voters education and registration drive like we've never seen. Get on the ground with those who don't understand or maybe don't want to and don't see the connection in voting. People who may have felt so disenfranchised by the process of not having the kind of representation that they want, to kind of bring them back to the table and help them see the bigger picture. I think we need to do a better job of connecting with those who deflect from the idea of the fact that we need to vote in general. So I'm of the mind that our ancestors went through it. Now it's our turn to go through it, and now we must do what they did to get the results that they got. But then I also think there needs to be some kind of strategy around figuring out where our people need to be to make the most of the opportunities that we do have in front of us, and look at this as another opportunity to grow, another opportunity to honor our legacy, and another opportunity to take it on our shoulders. I really want to be a part of some kind of effort, whether it's going down south and helping to register voters, whether doing it here in our own backyard, but rather offering, the history, so we can connect, why this is important. and try to, work through classes that we have, work through our issues, because we aren't a monolith. Some of us will fall on different parts of this argument, but there's enough space for us to do something in this fight. I don't care about the playoffs. I don't care about entertainers, falling out of love with one another. I don't care about none of that stuff. When it comes down to it, the right to practice democracy, our right to have representation at the city, at the local, at the state, and at the federal level is very important, and not just for me speaking personally, but for our people. And if we aren't careful, we really gonna have our back against the wall, because we saw how they were trying to move against the 14th Amendment. We know that the 15th Amendment is gonna, is being taken away, as we speak, and then the 13th Amendment as well. So enough of the finger pointing, enough of who didn't do what, who didn't vote for who. Now is the time to. I don't care where you think you are in society. You are one stroke of a pen away from being back. And I would call this a Jim Crow 2.0 era. The right to vote was a core part of our civil rights. And now, if you go into the Pistons game, or you go into the Michigan game, or the Tigers game, or you trying to go to the Chris Brown concert, or you trying to buy designer, fuck all that. It's time for some serious soul searching and some action. We need to be registering voters. If that's what you believe in, if you believe in independent economic thought, then you need to be saving that bread and finding a way to use it towards the proliferation of Black economics. If you believe in, you FBA, or you whatever you think you are, I'm a part of that crowd. We need to find a way to organize and lobby so we can ensure that the people who we will elect via our vote will move our issues forward. So, if your eyes aren't open to this now, and you want to talk to me about spring football, or you want to talk to me about the Pistons, or you want to talk to me about any of that fuck shit, save it. Let's figure out how we can connect and move forward to seeing our people forward. Because, and this is why I started my class. I started the first class, the economics of Jim Crow, because I wanted us to look at a reality that we may face, that our ancestors had to face, and using their lives as a case study to say, well, this is what W.E.B. Du Bois thought and did. Okay, well, they move forward with that. This is what Garvey did in his perspective. Well, those who believe in that move forward with that. What what Booker T. Washington did. Well, this is what they believed in. I don't care which one of those you fall into. Let's just continue to move forward. Then we went through our civil rights class, Power and Protest, where we looked at what everyday Americans did through organizing, who did sit-ins, who did protests, who did marches, who did what they had to do to ensure that locally, statewide, and nationally, that we could, have the rights that we're getting taken away today. And in the Black Power class, to show how, even though through some of those laws that were passed, it still wasn't enough, and what our revolutionaries like the Panthers and the Black Liberation Army and people did to try to move those forward, which brought us to where we are today in this class, looking at crack era, Reaganomics, mass incarceration. So this stuff is hitting me hard, because I've been living this and preparing for these classes. I've been living this and regurgitating this stuff and watching these documentaries and reading these books, and to see what's been going on, and to see, the legacy and the blood bought rights that our ancestors fought for taken away is just crazy. So we're gonna jump into class, but I'd be remiss if I didn't start with that. It's hard. I'm really taking it hard. So, as Kendrick would say, pray for your boy, because it's not feeling good right now. But I do understand we got to turn the page, and we got to move forward, connecting. And because I'm a believer in voting, but I'm also believing in having a reason to vote. And I also believe in doing the work to ensure that those who you put into office do the work that you've asked them to do. So, it's a tough day, tough time. Care less about the NBA playoffs. I could care less about entertainers. I could care less about any of that stuff, because right now we're at a crossroads. And even talking about this stuff here in our history in this class, I'm having a tough time turning that page, man, because it's hard. And we just I know we gotta move forward. We will move forward. There will be a day where we'll be talking about what we did from the moment that they overturned Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act and how we've did so much since, and the great things that we've done, and the next round of leaders that are gonna come up. And I can't wait for that day, but it's time to get to work. So week 4, or week 9, I'm sorry, AAS 477, regulators 94, 95. It's gonna be a fun week. Lot of good things to talk about. A lot of interesting kind of history to talk about. If you see the image here, it's just the 95 Source Awards, East Coast, West Coast kind of drama that was happening in hip hop, and that'll be one of the topics we'll talk about today. So our content here, today we're going to talk about the 1993 State of Black America report, and kind of put some basis of what was going on for our people during that time as we think about 94 and 95. We'll look at the dual kind of face of the Black middle class and upper middle class during that time. We'll talk about the 94 crime bill, which was the blueprint for mass incarceration as we transition away from the war on drugs to more on mass incarceration. Talk about how hip hop conquered the big and small screen on with movies and TV. We'll talk about Death Row and Bad Boy, and kind of the early beginning stages that brought us, especially with Bad Boy, and continue the story for Death Row, where these two empires and Black businesses collided. We'll talk the Million Man March, and then we'll move forward and get ready for next week. So let's start this conversation around the Black middle class. Or no. The 1993 State of Black America report. So, in essence, so a part of this class is we talk about a couple different things. We talk about the state of Black folks, just kind of the plight of Black folks from 1980 to the year 1999 or the year 2000. And then we talk about the growth and explosion of hip hop from a creative, a business, and a cultural lens. And then we talk about the war on drugs and mass incarceration. That's the core principles of this class. So what you get is a mixture of those things. So this falls into the state of Black America. And this, and we'll talk about, the Black middle and upper middle class as well. So in 1993, the Urban League produced a report that looked at the state of Black America. And it was a very bleak picture for the majority of Americans. Double-digit Black unemployment persisting since 1974. The Black and white unemployment gap continued to worsen, signaling economic inequality. Urban manufacturing collapse. We talked about deindustrialization. Manufacturing jobs were disappearing in cities like Detroit, Cleveland, Pittsburgh, the Rust Belt of the United States, disproportionately hitting Black workers and devastating urban economies. We've been talking about that from the 80s now on into the 90s. Civil rights setbacks, court rulings, policy shifts, eroding civil rights protections, reversing decades of progress and equal opportunity and legislative legal safeguards. And we've been living with that to this day. And we have to find a way to continue moving this forward. This is crazy to see this was going on in 93 and it's 2026, same thing happening. And then violence, young Black males experiencing epidemic levels of gun violence, creating devastating health and social consequences for community. We talked about how crack and the lack of opportunity built this into place. Imagine if these young people would have had the opportunity to have jobs or start businesses. Imagine if these young people had an opportunity to pursue their talents and their gifts, to get a quality education and have mom and dad at home. Imagine if these social economic issues were addressed by our economy and our government. You wouldn't have seen this, but these are intentional. So when I talk about these things that are happening, this wasn't just happening because Black folks was just degenerate folks and wanting to do this. When you put crack in the community, no jobs, and you put the laws to incarcerate them, of course you're gonna see this happen. So that's for one part of America. Now, the other part of Black America, prosperity behind the barriers, the middle class and upper middle class continued to rise, but still had their structural limitations. We saw over 620,000 Black-owned businesses by 1992, with receipts quadrupling in 15 years, a 50% increase in Black college enrollment between 1980 and 1990. Elite organizations like Jack and Jill, Lynx, were at their peak level of influence for that about 20%, I think it was, of the population. Suburban migration to affluent Black communities like Prince George's County, um, in Maryland and Atlanta. People were finding economic opportunities through franchise ownership. So McDonald's and Coca-Cola distribution centers and any kind of, you can think about these franchises, J.C. Penney, all these stores, all these kind of, ways that those who were able to tap into the American dream at that time were able to navigate. However, you saw Black median household income wealth only be 14% of white households, and inheriting wealth gaps, creating fragility. Continued on residential segregation despite income gains due to discriminatory lending and real estate practices around redlining. That was still going on in the 90s. And so even the internal debate, the Black middle class losing connection and roots and adopting exclusive practices. That was the big kind of a deal between Will and Carlton. If you go back to our conversation around Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, raising questions about community cohesion, authenticity, identity, and then Black middle class. But you even saw it the other way. If you remember the movie Sugar Hill, the young man like, yeah, I pop somebody, yeah, I do it. Young middle class young man trying to take that gangster route. So that was a tough time. So in essence, the community was still growing but still in flux, and this was all at the hands of what we were trying to do and how we wanted to maneuver. This brings us to the war on drugs. So we talked about in the 80s Reaganomics and the war on drugs, and crack, and we talked about how the this is crazy. We talked about Iran-Contra, the scandal which brought, and among other things, brought crack or coke into the country, which was distributed around the country and turned into crack eventually, through Reaganomics, the policies that undercut urban America and put it like a system where only things there is crack, and you get an opportunity to sell it and then go to prison for it. The laws, the acts of 1984, 1986, and 1988, which shored up those. We talked about those. Go back to the other video to watch that. And now we're transitioning away from the war on drugs to mass incarceration. Now that crack is here, now that the laws are on the books, the Clinton administration moved forward with looking to deal with crime, and that crime would lead to for-profit prisons, 3 strikes and you're out, super predators and mandatory minimums for youth, all this other stuff. So let's dig into that a little bit. And I have a video to help supplement this, so I'll move through this a little bit quickly, and then I will watch the video and it'll kind of give you some more with that. So the 1994 crime bill, the legislative journey from public fear to historical and controversial law. So in the early 1990s, violence was at its peak. That's kind of misleading because it was lower than it was in the 80s, and lower than it is now, but it still was a problem in the early 80s. And it was manufactured by crack in communities. You put crack there, you put guns there, you put no economic opportunities that can get you the kind of things that you can get outside of selling crack. Of course, you're going to have violence. Of course, this ain't just some degenerate people doing degenerate things. This is systematic forces that's putting this in place. And so people wanted to see an end to some of this stuff in their communities. People who were getting up every day and going to work, people who were trying to send their sons and daughters off to school, not to be dope dealers, not to be gang members, not to play in that. And so members of the Congressional Black Caucus and members of communities was putting pressure on government to say, hey, man, I just want to get up and go to work. I just want to have my kids go to school. I don't want them to be a part of the cycle. I don't want them to be Bebe and Man and Junebug and all them folks. I don't want them to do that. And so, the Bush Foundation, the Reagan and Bush had the Anti-Drug Abuse Act of 86 and 88, which established punishment-centric approaches, laying the foundational groundwork for the 94 crime bill. 93, we talked about this a couple weeks ago. I think it was last week. Clinton wins the election against Bush and promises punishment will be more certain, So the Violent Crime Control Law and Enforcement Act was passed 1994. Y'all main man Joe Biden, y'all main girl Hillary Clinton leading that charge, calling these young people super predators who have no morals, no father, no God, and we need to do something about them, and we need to do something about their parents. Not treat addiction, not bring economic opportunity to communities, not foster opportunity for those who are facing or on that line between doing both. We need to lock these niggas up. And then you wonder, as we even talk about the Voting Rights Act right now, we wonder why. Well, why didn't y'all vote for Hillary? Because she was on that fuck shit. For some of us, we would say, well, what about Biden? Well, he was on that fuck shit too. You know what I'm saying? So, you know, those who say, well, I told you need to do this. Well, you want me to vote for the people who put my uncle, my daddy, my granddaddy in prison, and he's still there for 20 years, or they was there for 40 years because you was giving them football numbers, or 3 strikes and you out. So it's more, it's a real conversation to have. And so in essence, the core bill provisions, it was 100,000 new police officers, which was a 20% budget increase to $12 billion of federal investment. 3 strikes law, tried 14-year-olds as adult, and new prisons for 100,000 new inmates. And we'll talk more about that as we move forward. And we already know about the discrepancy between coke and crack. You know, powder cocaine gets you probation. 5 grams of crack gives you 5 years as a mandatory. Black drug offenders during that time in 1985, it was only 16,600. By 1995, it was 134,707. 707% increase over time. And what mass incarceration did to our community, some people are still paying those prices. So there's a lot more to say. I'm gonna bring up this video to further have that conversation. What we found was it was a disparity. Powder cocaine was mostly white users. Crack cocaine, which they said was mostly black users, but weren't. Even the 2/3 of crack users, and here it is right here, were white. But their convictions paled in comparison between 88 and 94, while black crack arrests, soared. So just by virtue of the numbers, there's more of those folks. Of course, they're gonna have more of it. And so, you know, they chose police militarization, helicopters, battering rams, elite special units, surveillance, deployed in big and small cities, empowering local and federal police to kind of have their way, when they could have said, okay, we can address jobs, treatment, and economic opportunities to kind of solve this issue. So I'm gonna pull up this video so we can further this conversation. If you're watching this on YouTube, feel free to drop a like, drop a share. I think it's important that we get this information out, especially now in these times. So I'm gonna share my screen and we're gonna put this video up a couple minutes to talk more about the war on drugs. I mean, the beginning of mass incarceration with the Crime Control Act of 1994. So the Crime Bill 1994, excuse me.
When this bill is law, we will have 100,000 police officers on the street, a 20% increase. It will be used to build prisons to keep 100,000 violent criminals off the street. We will have the means by which we can say punishment will be more certain.
The whippings of mass distraction have always been in the play. People follow their sports teams more than they follow the things that's going to affect them every day. So a lot of times the bills are passed and politicians go back and forth, and all of a sudden you turn around and there's a crime bill that not only affects your present, but really seriously affects your future.
Absolutely. And I also want to say this is used for educational purpose only. I don't own this material. I'm not looking to profit off this material. This is for educational use only. Shout out to Chuck D.
Clinton passed a crime bill which allowed now 14-year-olds to be tried as adults, more prisons being built.
The impact of the crime bill is devastating and felt almost immediately. For example, the 3 strikes law, this idea that if you have 3 offenses, that you're out of here, right? Like you go away. It increases your sentencing dramatically.
And imagine that impact on families.
That is embedded into the crime bill.
Violent crimes should be told. When you commit a third violent crime, you will be put away and put away for good.
Sentencing discrepancies when it comes to drugs.
Cocaine versus crack.
Crack, cocaine.
Cocaine versus crack cocaine.
The penalty for possession of 5 grams of crack cocaine, the drug used and sold by many young blacks, is 5 years in prison. The penalty for possession of 5 grams of powdered cocaine, the drug favored by the white middle class, is probation.
Like that's absolutely insane. Same product, but because of who the user is, you can go from probation to 5 years in the state or federal prison, where you'll serve 85% of your time if it's a federal case. This is America. Don't let them trick you.
And that's why so many people who got caught with very small amounts ended up doing really major time.
Do you think you'll be coming back here again?
That's hard to say.
These communities were asking for help. We know that they were like, we have problems. But what they were asking for was to get to the root of the problem. So that doesn't mean locking up a generation of African Americans or labeling.
Right. You know what I'm saying? I just want Man and Ray to have an opportunity. I don't want to see them do 20 years for having a couple grams of crack. I want them to be able to take that business sense that they had to run that crack empire and be able to go run a pharmaceutical company, be able to run a company that's traded on Wall Street. We just wanted them to, out of our backyard, selling that stuff with opportunities to go to business school, not necessarily to go to the pen.
Every black man who walks out of his house a gang leader.
And we see, you know, and mass incarceration, you know, still has roots in our community today, and it's a shame. It truly is. So yeah, you know, we'll continue to have this conversation next week. We'll talk about kind of the impacts between 95, 96, 97, 98, 99 of what this law and this practice did, you know, in urban community. So now let's shift the conversation to a brighter topic, if you will. Hip hop taking over TV and the movies. So during this time, especially in the movies, you got, you know, hip hop taking over everything. You got 1994, Above the Rim, one of my favorite movies of all time. You know, Birdie and Kyle Lee Watson. You know, another chance to look at, you know, urban community. Death Row did the soundtrack, one of the best soundtracks ever. All these movies have really good soundtracks. So you had Tupac, you know, taking the lead role in this. You have Friday with Ice Cube, you know, a cult classic look at a different view of South Central LA. In this one, you just had a neighborhood bully. You ain't have all that other stuff. You had, you know, cat smoking weed and a neighborhood bully, and they resolved it. You know, a 2-parent household. You had a lot of interesting things going on. You had Bad Boys with Will Smith and Martin Lawrence. And this is the last time Martin actually was playing a cool role. He wasn't just the fuddy-duddy like he would become later. One of my favorite movies, the best one out of the trilogy, I think. You had Higher Learning with Ice Cube, and what I loved about this was John Singleton, you know, coming off of Boys in the Hood in 91, Poetic Justice in 93. This was a look at the college campus, you know, being a college educated brother himself, and a fraternity man himself. He took you on campus to look at how some of these same issues of race, class, and culture find their way to a college campus. And for some viewers, it was the first time you got the chance to see a young black athlete off the field, or the super duper senior with the knowledge, or the Caribbean brother, Mr. Williams. This is a game. give some perspective there. You also had the movie Black Panther, and I didn't add it here. Mario Van Peebles jumping in. You know, we talked about a couple weeks ago. Spike Lee bringing the Malcolm X story, and you have Mario Van Peebles jump in and give us a story about the Black Panthers, which is really good. One of my favorite movies. I guess I was a kid during this era, so all these are some of my favorite movies of all time. You had the Hughes brothers coming off a success of Menace to Society, bringing us a view of what happened to young Black men after they left Vietnam, and some of the choices that they made in Dead Presidents in 1995. And all of these soundtracks, you know, were really good as well and charted as well. And you had Tales from the Hood, a very interesting kind of it reminds you of like the blaxploitation era we talked about last class, in that you started to see the genre go from just these gangster movies to, you know, we're going to horror, comedy, action. So all these movies, if you was from my generation, this was when we were in 6th, 7th grade, you know, kids, and became classics. And hip hop was at the forefront of that. Every last one of these movies had, you know, was starring somebody from hip hop. So this ain't even talking about the music, just talking about the impact. And then we had TV. So you had people like LL Cool J in the house on network TV coming along with the Fresh Prince. And then you had Living Single, Queen Latifah. And what was so unique about Living Single? We talking about the Black middle class and Buppies. Well, we talking about a newspaper editor, a lawyer. We talking about not newspaper, magazine editor, professionals. I guess Overton was a blue collar brother. Kyle, what was Kyle? Was Kyle in marketing? He was in finance, I think he was. And then you had Regime, who, what did Regime do? If you know what Regime did, drop it in the chat. What did Regime do? And you had lawyers, you had everybody. So it was a very interesting time to look at what this combination of people would look like. And some would say this laid the foundation for Friends in New York. LL Cool J leaving the mic for a little time, coming and bringing his hip hop celebrity as the like the Black Charles in Charge. The first season, then it changed. They added Carlton and Kim Wayans along the way, but and then you had the Parenthood, which isn't hip hop, but it was post Cosby, Robert Townsend of 5 Heartbeats. I got nothing but love for you, baby. Left the films for a while, and Meteor Man, you know, he did, and we didn't talk about that much. To bring another Black family. He was a teacher. His wife was a lawyer, or turned to be a lawyer, and they was navigating this early 90s space. Shout out to Zoria. Shout out to CC. Shout out to what's my main man? Nick. Shout out to Nick. Let me see. I see a comment here. The golden era, right? Shout out to Nicholas, you know, and then they added the other young man. So shout out to them for that time. So hip hop was really making his way. She was a buyer. Okay, buyer. I knew she did something. I knew she ain't just work at the store. But you're talking about these middle class folks. So, you know, that was kind of cool too. Let's see, hip hop on TV and in the movies. All right, let's keep this conversation flowing here. So the 94 to 95, this was a very interesting period in hip hop. Some would call this a East Coast resurgence, in that while 92, 93 was heavy on the West Coast. I'm talking about Dr. Dre, the Chronic, Snoop Dogg, the Doggy Style. This was an era where hip hop was starting to kind of, East Coast was kind of trying to come back. So you had this G-Funk going on in California, but you had this jazz-related hip-hop going on the East Coast. So you see records like Illmatic, Nas Illmatic, which wasn't a commercial success at the time, but it was a cultural force. It was like he took what Rakim did and took it to another level, and he would have his time in the sun next time, and we'll talk about that. Biggie, Ready to Die, we'll talk about that as we move forward. Outkast, Southern Playalistic Cadillac Music. We'll talk about the 95 Source Awards, where they said the South got something to say. You had Common coming out of the East Coast, coming out of Chicago. Gang Starr, Scarface coming from the South. Goody Mob coming from the South. And also 1995, you had Method Man, you had the Wu-Tang Clan, you had the Roots emerging, ODB. Pac dropped Me Against the World as he was in prison. Keith Murray, the Friday soundtrack. KRS-One still doing his thing. Looney's I Got 5 on It. Raekwon, the Purple Tape. You had so much going on. So I'm talking about Mobb Deep, the infamous 1995, 94. You're talking about other things happening outside of the story that I'm telling. The South is really starting to rise. You got Scarface, and you got 3-6 Mafia brewing in Memphis. You got No Limit on the precipice of on their way out. So hip hop was really doing this thing. The Wu was really starting to show, and you had the sample based jazz hip hop on the East, and you had this West Coast gangster funk still happening on the West. Shout out to Nas, who really moved the thing forward. And these are just a couple of albums. Can't cover them all, but just enough to kind of tell the story of what was going on outside of our main story here. And so from here, you had, I will continue our story on Death Row. So what we've been doing with Death Row Records is we've been looking at it from an economic perspective. So we started the conversation last week looking at this as an analysis of their business model. We talked about how they had, it was a startup between Dr. Dre, the DOC, the gentleman from Solar Records, and Suge Knight, and how they brought in new investors. Harry O, this drug kingpin out of California who had a distribution network around the country in those Reagan 80 years, and his lawyer, Kerner, who brought the company to the point where they were ready for expansion, and they brought in Interscope and Priority to do some distribution. So the startup is in full mode. We looked at the first product with the Chronic, or the prototype with the Deep Cover song from the Deep Cover soundtrack, the first product of the Chronic, which sold millions of records and stayed on the pop charts for over a year. Then we talked about the second product, which was Death Row, which was Doggy Style, which blew up even more and took Snoop to the top of the chart. So Death Row as a company is a $400 million company with investments from the Dope Game at $1.5 million, with Interscope and them coming in at a couple million. So you got this startup really leaving startup phase and really in its growth model here. But during this part of the company, we're talking about the interesting part of Death Row at this part of the company was now you're starting to see, as a company grow. If you remember watching one of my favorite movies as well, is Social Network, the story of Facebook. Now we're at the part of the company where now you got Interscope backing you. You got a really big investor in you. Some of the early investors are starting to get themselves snaked out of their investments. So Harry O, which was their first really big investor, is starting to find himself on the outside of what's going on. All this money, all this power. So you got Suge and the lawyer, Mr. Kerner, coming together to draft new papers for a new Death Row and cutting out Harry O, who was the first really big investor. And he like, cool, just give me I want a return on my investment. I want my initial investment back and my dividends from how we grew, which, didn't necessarily come. He was locked up. And so he found himself on the other end of a beatdown because, he couldn't get his investment back. And so you're starting to see the company kind of change. So while success is still happening and you got this multi-million-dollar business, well, on the other side, you had a war on what they were doing. This gangster rap music, we talked about it last week. C. Dolores Tucker, all these other fights against it. And so you got primary backers, especially in the form of Time Warner, looking to get out of the business, leaving it just in Interscope's hands. So now you got Interscope still holding the label. The company still moving forward. Early investors getting pushed out, and a change of culture. First, Death Row was a place of creativity. It was a place where this young Black entrepreneur, Suge Knight, was able to leverage the talent that they had in their backyard to build a model to show that this music can sell. Well, now, because of its success, it's starting to become more gang-related, more prison-esque, because you got people coming out of prison, coming straight to the label, so it's not as creative as it used to be. And you starting to have people like Dr. Dre like, hey, man, I don't know about this no more. I ain't really feeling it. And then Suge Knight buying into the persona that, no, this is what we do around here. This is how we handle it. You come see me. And we heard about some of the humiliation rituals people will have to go to. You got niggas that's I'm sorry. You got people who were incarcerated and institutionalized coming home to a business to where it used to be, I'm going to get my lawyer to see about you. No, I'm going to beat you down now. Or now we're going to play the same games we played in prison. We're going to play here. And Suge Knight didn't even really fit that bill. He came from a 2-parent household. He was a college graduate. He played football at the University of Miami and graduated. So he wasn't this, but he's starting to turn this death row into this game. And so it's starting to change what you want to see. And so at this time, let me see what I got here. That I'm moving forward. Okay. So at this time, you got the next kind of phase of death row. Part 1 was the Chronic and Doggy Style. Part 2 here, you got Snoop is facing some legal issues now. So there was a shooting that happened at his video shoot. I'll never forget this because the gentleman's name, his bodyguard's name was McKinley Lee, and that's my name. And so I always remembered that name. But he was driving. His security popped a cat, and Snoop went on trial, and they put him on 2 years house arrest. So now you got your main breadwinner on his time of his rollout, going to doing a trial, and he can't leave. So they had to figure out other creative ways to keep the Def Jam brand going, and they did that through they acquired the rights to do the music for Above the Rim. And so this was a chance for, you had Snoop out, you had Dr. Dre out. This is a chance for other talent on Death Row to kind of showcase. So you had the Lady of Rage, I rock rough and stuff with my Afro pups. Hey, rock on with your bad self. That was a hit record. If you remember the Doggy Style record, she was the first voice you heard rapping on that record. You had Snoop and the Dog Pound with a record called Big Pimpin', one of my favorite songs of all time. And it was a gentleman at the end of that song who did a poem. It was the first time I heard spoken word poetry, and it blew my mind. I had pimped my pen on cold Michigan nights. He even said the Michigan. And so, just a crazy album. You had Pain by Tupac. So it was a chance for Death Row and Tupac to even get some connection. And then you had Regulators by Warren G, but we'll get to that. And then from there, you had Snoop drop Murder Was the Case, and that went 2 times platinum. Debuted at #1 on the charts. And then you had Murder Was the Case. So Snoop's profile was rising because not only was he saying this gangster stuff on the record, now it's a nigga dead. Snoop's profile is rising. He's on this trial, so the sales are going through the roof. They dropped Murder Was the Case, which was the short film that showed Snoop getting murdered, making a deal with the devil, and coming back and doing what he do. As a kid, I loved it, but now that I'm older, I listen to it like, you made a deal with the devil and you still ended up, you go from being a nigga shot to making a deal with the devil, being a drug kingpin, and then the person who ended up in prison. So it was an interesting kind of set, but that came out, that went double platinum. And the Dog Pound really started to shine on that. The What Would You Do? What would you do if you could get with me and my crew? That came out, and that was a hit record. The Helter Skelter, I think the song was, with Dr. Dre and Ice Cube getting back together. That was a hit, went double platinum. And then you had Dog Food drop. And then, so Snoop's case is still going on. It goes from 93 to 96. He's on house arrest for 2 years. And so we'll talk about next week what happens at the end of that trial. So while he can't tour, he can't do much. He performed at the Video Music Awards, if you remember, came out with his hair pressed up. I'm innocent. And did Murder Was the Case, and it was a hit, and everybody loved it. And we'll talk about what happened with that trial next week as we go into 1996. At the same time, they still rolling out the hits. They rolled out the Dog Pound. So now it was the Dog Pound's turn up. Daz on the beats and on the mic, Corrupt. So they're bringing another kind of version of this G-Funk. So you got the Chronic is the past now. Snoop Doggy Style is the past now. Murder Was the Case, and now you got the Dog Pound coming. Another double platinum album debuted at #1. All these albums debuting at #1. Gangster rap is in its full pursuit, and you got Death Row moving forward. So now they're trying to figure out, how do we keep this thing rolling? And we'll look at the acquisition of new talent and a new product, if you will, from a business perspective, with the acquisition of Tupac. So you got 3 albums over this time, the second phase of Death Row, all double platinum albums, all debuting on top of the charts, all still being the movement that hip hop is moving forward with. But there's another story here that isn't a Death Row story, but it's Death Row adjacent. So I'm gonna take Death Row off, And we're going to talk real quick about Warren G. We talked about the song Regulators, Mount Up, which was a number 2 record in the country, number 1 album. It debuted. And I'll be quick about this, but I want to talk about Warren G, one of my favorite artists from that time, even as a kid, because I could listen to the Warren G album. Snoop and all that I wasn't supposed to be listening to, but Warren G, that was decent. I could listen to that, and I had that tape too. So Warren G and Nate Dogg had the song Regulate. But the interesting story with Warren G was when the Chronic came out, he was a big folks. Well, let me take a step back. First, he was stepbrothers with Dr. Dre. So that's how he got looped in. He had his own expertise around DJing and making beats. And was a part of the Chronic. He was a part of bringing all that stuff together. He was a part of, he did the skits. If you remember D's Nuts and all these other things he was on, he was a big part of that. But when it was time for, it was kind of, you remember the scene from Above the Rim, when it was time for the Birdmen to go to the local tournament at the Rucker Park and the Marlon Wayans character got kicked out. Birdie's like, get the fuck up out of here. You ain't in the group. You ain't doing this. Same kind of thing happened to Warren G in 1992 when Death Row was ready to go and everybody putting their jackets on and getting their chains and ready to go on the road. Suge ain't have one for him. And Dr. Dre was like, yeah, bro, you got to go your own way. What Warren G didn't know at that time was, one, he was saying, look, man, you got to be your own man. Don't come on my coattail. Go build your own. And you don't want to be involved with what's going on over here. There's a lot of sticky stuff going on. And so it sent him back to, so all your homies, Snoop, Nate Dogg, everything you've been building, all y'all who've been in the studio leaving to go on tour for the Chronic, and you got to stay. So that was tough for him to have to deal with. But during that time, he found his way by building his own brand. He went back and refocused. He got connected with MC Breed and Tupac and did the record, I Gotta Get Mine, You Gotta Get Yours. He got music on the Poetic Justice soundtrack. Kept moving him forward. He just kept building his own thing. And it was interesting because after those successes, the G-Funk continued to build because the G-Funk wasn't Dr. Dre's style. It was Above the Law. And Above the Law brought Warren G in. So this is like more of a Warren G kind of style. So he's building this sound as he's going. And at the same time, Big Bad Def Jam Records, who we talked about early with, Public Enemy and Beastie Boys and LL Cool J, they were at a point where they were about to go bankrupt, just like we talked about with Interscope Records when they got involved with Death Row. These companies about to go bankrupt. Well, they needed a hit, and who do they go find? They go find Warren G. He put the song Regulate. They put it on the Above the Rim soundtrack. It goes to number 2. It's a hit record, sells 4 million records. And he's right where he should be, next to Snoop, next to Dre, next to the Dog Pound, but it ain't with Death Row. So Suge is sick. Like he had some kind of issue with Warren G. He didn't want to see him. He ain't want to see him do his thing. But Warren G found his way. And I remember in 6th grade, me and my homeboy Tony Brown, we sang this song. We was about to graduate from 6th grade because back at home it was you go to elementary up to 6th grade, you graduate in 6th grade, you go to junior high for 7th, 8th, and 9th. And then you graduate there and you go to high school from 10th, 11th, and 12th. And so we were going, I remember we would practice the song every day on our walk over to Northwestern from Dudley to get ready to graduate. And on the last day of school, Mr. Crawford, our 6th grade teacher, let us have like this impromptu talent show where he did Warren G's part and I did Nate Dogg's part. And we would do that all the time. And then you fast forward, we would do the same thing in middle school. Us two, we would do the words from Friday. For somehow we both knew all the words. And we would do the whole thing. So while we would be in swim, they would be in swimming, and we ain't swim. We would go sit up in the bleachers, and we would have people sit around us, and we would do the whole Friday movie. So I just think about that on the side. But Warren G got his just due. He was able to show not only Death Row, but the world of what the G-Funk could be. And his version of the G-Funk, I think it was somebody, Ice-T said, he'll be like, I'll shoot you if I have to, but that ain't really what I want to do. I'm just trying to get it in. Even if you think about the song Regulate, they took my ring, they took my Rolex. You look at the part, it's like, damn, what's next? So he played the G-Funk more from a musical, and I get gangster if I have to, but the music is gangster. So shout out to Warren G, one of my favorites, who's still up and doing his thing today. So a part of bringing the East Coast back was West Coast music. How crazy is that? And it was a hit record, and he and Nate Dogg really moved forward with that. So this also brought the rise of Bad Boy. And I'll do this from a business perspective, but not as much as I did with the Death Row. So, you know, Puffy, we got to talk about Puff Daddy. We both went to Howard, so I got love for Puff. You know, I always had a love-hate relationship with Puff and the Jigga Man. I always did. I loved them for what they did, but I had a problem with them for what they did. So Puff from the Howard era, you know, he was a dancer at first. Used to throw parties, used to get it in. He left Howard after 1 year, and I can relate to that. He went to Uptown Records and went from being an intern to A&R and broke through with a brand new style. They were taking the New Jack Swing style and bringing their life to it. So on Uptown Records, run by Andre Harrell, you know, he was overseeing the work of Father MC. Treat them like they want to be treated. You should treat them right. And Mary J. Blige, because what they did was they used to have these kind of like these mixtapes where they would put R&B singers over hardcore hip hop beats. And if you know anything about what's the 411, that's what that was. Over some hard beats, she's singing the first lady of hip hop soul. Jodeci, he was a part of that. The remix, if you go back to Come and Talk to Me, the boom, 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 over them singing, you know, so that was just kind of his style. You know, he got too big for his britches eventually, and he got fired for conflicts with Andre Harrell on the direction of how things should go. And he set out to do his independent venture. He ended up, you know, working with Clive Davis to do an independent joint venture with a $1.5 million investment into Craig Mack, Flavor in Your Ear, and Big, who was going to be the star. And so Big and Craig was with him during his final years at Uptown Records, but he brought them over, and I put the acquisition of Big, and they put out Ready to Die, and Ready to Die was an album that solidified the East Coast as coming back. However, if you remember, the Big Papa record is that West Coast sound. So even in East Coast resurgence, you still have marks of the West Coast sound in there. And then Big brought, you know, lyrical ability, telling stories of, you know, East Coast didn't have the pimps, players, and the Macs like that, but they had the stick up kids, they had the gangsters, they had the dope dealers, and that's what Big personified in his music, which brought attention. Ready to Die. Let me see here. I want to have the stats to stunt right here. Ready to Die came out, went triple platinum, you know, really brought back the East Coast sound and had a role in what would be the burgeoning tension between East and West. So now we have to talk about, you know, one of my main men, Tupac Shakur. You know, Tupac was a very interesting character in that, you know, he is one that is debated among his fans as a lot of different things. He was a lot of different things to a lot of different people. On one note, he was a revolutionary because he was the son of a Black Panther, Afeni Shakur, who was a part of the Panther 21 that we talked about last class. In another regard, he was a phenomenal actor who could act with the best of them. And you saw that in his many different roles. And some of them, he was a thug and a gangster because he represented, you know, thug life in his personification. But I would always say Pac was a chameleon. He had a lot of different sides. And we'll talk about how his rise to fame and his ultimate imprisonment led, and his getting out with Death Row led him to kind of the next phase of his career. We ain't gonna talk about 96 yet. So yeah, born to a Black Panther activist, got his big start with Digital Underground, doing the Humpty Hump, you know, doing a dancer and a roadie, which led to, you know, he was an actor as well. His starring role in Juice, which really changed everything. That personification of Bishop really made people love and appreciate what he could do. He dropped the album Tupacalypse Now, where it had the Brenda Had a Baby, When My Homies Call, Trapped. I remember hearing this music because my sister was, you know, 6 years older than me. I was able to hear this music at a young age and really find my way to attach to it. After that, he did a Poetic Justice, where he was with playing a different character, playing Lucky, who was a mailman and a straight up and down cat. He ain't smoked no weed. He smoked cigarettes. trying to get his music off the ground. The trip that they took up to Oakland, you saw him in a different way. Then he put out the album, his second album, Strictly for My Niggas, which really started to show the change in Pac. On one song, it was Keep Your Head Up, Baby Girl, we love you, we supporting you. But the other one, the underground just don't stop for hoes, I get around. And then the other song, Holla If You Hear Me. So you had the revolutionary Pac and transitioning into gangster with the Holla If You Hear Me record. You had the kind of misogynist gangster kind of persona with I Get Around, which everybody loved, was a fun record. But then you had to Keep Your Head Up. So he's really starting to show these many different layers. This all things for all people. So during this time, you know, he's starting to stake his claim on his talent, but also being mixed up in the law enforcement. You know, I remember he said in an interview, one of my favorite movies, Tupac Resurrection, and I'll drop a link for that. He talked about saying, you know, before I had a record out, I never had a issue with the cops in my life. But that first record was the more revolutionary Pac. So he's talking about police brutality and what I do to a cop and the problems of a young black male and how I can be there for my homeboys. And Brenda Got a Baby. It was a different side of Pac. And so he started having run-ins with the cop. One of them in Oakland where they brutalized him for jaywalking, and then you know, he had an issue where he got into a legal issue with cops in Atlanta where he sought fire, you know, assaults and guns charges and all this stuff. But the fast forward to the story, 1994 was a crazy year for Pac. He's filming Above the Rim. He's working on the album Me Against the World, and he's on this trial for sexual assault. So during the day, I go work on the film, or during my week, I'm either in court working on this film, and at night I'm working on this album. I got all this stuff to fulfill. And I'm still dealing with all these different legal battles. So when I'm out, if I'm in LA, if I'm in Oakland, if I'm in Atlanta, I'm dealing with this. So I'm going to jail for this, or I'm getting a suspended sentence for that, or I'm doing speaking engagements here. So he's really building his brand on his talent and on the propaganda that he's always in the news. During his rape trial, and I will say this. So the story goes that this woman came up to him in the club, gave him some oral sex. They ended up back at a hotel. They had a good time that night. And after that, after he went to sleep or whatever happened then, others tried to enjoy her as well. And she said, they all raped me. They all sodomized me. They all this. So he's fighting this public perception of being a thug, doing this stuff while still trying to shoot this movie and get this album done. In the middle of this trial, he goes to see who he feels are friends at Quad City Studios in New York City. He gets shot 5 times and goes to the hospital for a couple of days, checks himself out the hospital to go over Jasmine Guy's house where the Fruit of Islam, his mama, and a private doctor are taking care of him during that time. After that, he goes back to the 3 days later, go back to the trial. He gets found guilty and sentenced to, I think it was 4 to 7 years in prison. So now he's sitting in prison. During his first year in prison, they finally dropped the album with Dear Mama as the lead single, a #1 record, #1 album, while he's in prison plotting a way to get out. During this time in prison, you got Big blowing up. Now Junior Mafia's turn is getting money. The song Who Shot You comes out. So he thinks that's, you know, pointed towards him. And he is, you know, trying to find his way up out of jail. Connect back to the Death Row story. Death Row, who has a parent company or a partner company with, and I see a comment popped up. That's what's up. Has a partner company. So remember, Interscope and Death Row are our partner companies in this business venture. Tupac is on Interscope. And so this very shady kind of deal happens where Pac is at his lowest. He don't got no support from his record label. He had to spend $3 million to stay out before he was sentenced. So he's kind of at the bottom of his funds. All his friends he feel are turning their back on him, and he locked up. He doing 11 months of his 4-year sentence in prison, and Suge Knight coming through like, hey man, I can get you up out this mug. I got that money for you. You know, I can get you up out of here, but we need you to sign over to us. Now, this was able to happen because Interscope and Death Row were in business together to say, okay, well, we can transfer this commodity over to you for a while because you are a $400 million company. And then you make sure you make it right with us and we'll do it right. So there's some kind of agreement to where this is done for $1.4 million. Pac is signed to a 3-album deal. No wonder why his first album was a double album, All Eyes on Me, and then Machiavelli, which they did in a week, because he's trying to fulfill this agreement and get back on what he wanted to get to. So, but we'll stop at the acquisition. They acquired Tupac for $1.4 million, 3-album deal to go on death row and to move this thing forward. Pac got all these feelings about the East Coast because I was shot there. My friends turned on me. The law turned on me on the East Coast. I'm done with the East Coast and I'm coming back West. Who is a movie star anyway, because he was always in LA and he spent a lot of his life in Oakland. So he had these two sides to him. So they acquired Tupac, and now we'll get to next week what happened in 96 and 97 with him and Pac, with him and Big, and we'll talk more about this kind of a little bit of the East Coast, West Coast war. So the East Coast, West Coast war started with what I just talked about. Pac finally out of jail. He is, now he's, East Coast, West Coast. Okay, I guess I missed that. I'll go back to Tupac then. So now we have a situation to where Pac is, well, this happened before. Let's get to this and then we'll get back to Pac. So now you're in a situation to where Death Row been killing the East for years. Def Jam had to go West Coast to get them a hit. LL is doing TV shows. Public Enemy ain't what they used to be. The Wu-Tang Clan and all these other cats, they doing it, but they ain't doing it as big. And so now you got the East Coast, West Coast war brewing, and it kind of happened at the 95 Source Awards where everything kind of took place. So I'm going to bring up this video, and we've all seen this. If you're from my area, you've seen this. But these are kind of the issues that happened during the 1995 Source Awards when Pac was still in jail between East Coast and West Coast. So I'm going to play this real quick, and then we'll jump in. And this is in New York, by the way. The Source magazine holding awards for the best this, best that, best this. And this is what proceeds to happen at Source Awards.
Any artists out there want to be an artist and want to stay a star, don't want to have to worry about the executive producer trying to be all in the videos, all on the record, dancing. Come to Death Row.
So that's that. If you from my area, you know, all in the videos. So he talking about Puff. Now, what sucks are these are two black young entrepreneurs making millions of dollars in the industry with industry partners, of course, but two young black entrepreneurs that can't seem to find their way to unity in this business model because you're in competition for that #1 spot. And so should come out and say that after they won an award, right? Come to Death Row, right? Exactly. Double album, right? And so this is like now Suge and them saying, F y'all, we in New York and we shooting our shot at y'all right now. And so in addition, now Death Row winning all the awards because they've been having a couple years. So then you get this. Shout out to Danny boy.
The East Coast don't love Dr. Dre and Snoop Dogg.
Y'all don't love us.
The East Coast ain't got no love for Dr. Dre and Snoop Dogg and Death Row. Y'all don't love us. Y'all don't love us. Well, let it be known then. We know y'all East Coast. We know we at East Coast and else.
And so now, you know, Dr. Dre and Snoop winning an award, Suge winning an award. They basically saying we dominating y'all. Y'all started the culture, but the culture is ours now. Don't ever get it twisted. And so now you got the East Coast saying, even if they didn't have problems with Suge and them, everybody who got an album out got to go out to LA. Everybody who because these record labels sending you on a tour. But now shots are being fired across the board. And another, I'll talk about this later. So now you got this happening. And so, you know, what happens in response to this?
I'm the executive producer that a comment was made about a little bit earlier. But check this out. Contrary to what other people may feel, I would like to say that I'm very proud of Dr. Dre, of Death Row, and Suge Knight for their accomplishments. And all this East and West that needs to stop.
And so, you know, Puff get on and say, look, let's kill that. Let's kill that noise. I ain't with that. I'm making money. People who I'm in business with don't want me doing this. They want me making that money. And so now you got this tension between East and West. But what I didn't show here, you also had tension from the South Outkast wins Best New Artist over Nas, over a couple other New York acts, and they boo them too. And 3 Stacks, Andre 3000 get up there and say, whether y'all care or not, South got something to say. And if you was around from 2000 to today, the South had something to say. They did. And so now you got this East Coast, West Coast thing happening. You got this tension brewing, and now you got little sneak disses here and there in the music. You got a media frenzy, a Vibe magazine writing this, or these people writing that, or Pac do a interview with Vibe magazine and say this, or Puff and them would do that. And so now you got this problem building and escalating between East and West, when it's really just Bad Boy against Death Row. And that's why the acquisition of Tupac we talked about earlier, well, I got a problem with them cats. It's up. Let's take this thing up. So now you got, East Coast, West Coast brewing, because, as Rodney King said, we all just couldn't get along. But then another perspective is this was just hype. Everybody selling millions of records. The people all involved is white outside of these people fighting. They want to bring all this frenzy up so people continue to buy music, continue to buy shirts, continue to go to concerts, continue to watch the videos, continue to buy the magazines. And we're left being those guys that choose to play this out. So that's, what was going on there. So in addition to this, we have still the war on hip hop. We talked about last week how C. Dolores Tucker and others were taking hip hop to task for the lyrics, for the content of the music, and not just taking hip hop artists to the task, taking the executives and all these other people saying, well, y'all giving them the money to call me the bitch and the hoe. Y'all giving them the money to say I want to shoot my own brother. They ain't talking about F the police no more. They're talking about F my brother, F these people here. And so they bringing it. And so she had a 1 year of her campaign was just bringing the light to it. The second year of it was to have some Senate hearings, looking to censor hip hop lyrics. And they had this congressional committee come in 1994, where you had some of the best and brightest from the scholar perspective, from the hip hop perspective, come and go in front of Congress and give kind of a perspective on hip hop, gangster rap, and rap lyrics. They were trying to figure out what's the line between free speech. Remember, we talked about that a couple weeks ago with 2 Live Crew as they started. Well, we talked about it a couple weeks ago with Prince and his work. Then we talked about it with 2 Live Crew with the sexually explicit lyrics. Then we talked about it with Snoop Dogg, Dr. Dre, and West and Death Row. And then we talked about it with Ice-T with his Cop Killer song. Then we talked about it, with some of this stuff, going on. Underground just don't stop for hoes and bitches and niggas and all this other stuff. And so now it's made its way in front of Congress. You have a very interesting dynamic here. And I want to play a bit from this hearing. Nelson George, who I named the class after, it was a book called Post Soul. It was basically talking about the 80s. I read the book and it was such an amazing title. I entitled my class Post Soul. And George Nelson, writer, filmmaker, author, had a really interesting take that I agreed with on gangster rap. And so I'm gonna play this quick clip, and then we're gonna move forward in our conversation. But I thought this is very interesting when you try to looking at hip hop lyrics and gangster rap without looking at the larger culture that kind of fed and created this gangster rap. So give me just a second. I'm gonna share my screen and we will keep it moving. And that's Yo-Yo sitting next to him, and that's Nelson George right there.
Put this in the context, because I think we haven't really done that totally. Gangster rap, as we know it as a genre of music, really has its roots in the mid-'80s. There's a couple of artists you might cite, particularly Ice-T, who made records in independent labels in the mid-'80s, as well as KRS-One had an album called Criminal Minded that came out in '87, I believe, which also was one of the first to deal with the drug culture. One of the things that's very clear about the evolution of this music is that it got more intense, rap music got more intense, more violent, when crack cocaine became one of the leading forces of economics in the Black community. You can almost look at the indice of gangster rap being created, particularly '89, '88, when NWA broke through, which was the really first superstar gangster rap group that Dr. Dre, Ice Cube, etc. came out of. Much of their material deals with crack cocaine. especially that period. The amount of violence in the Black community in cities like DC, for example, New York City, LA, all escalated with the introduction of crack cocaine. The gangs that had so often been in LA for years and years in the Black community became much more dangerous, much more violent, in fact, became national concerns in the sense when crack cocaine became this viable tool for expansion of their criminal enterprises. The gangster rappers know it is very much a reflection of this new environment that was created by crack cocaine. And this is, you can look at it, gangster rappers, we describe it, it's been discussed from like 88 to 89 to now. Before that, there were always some records that dealt with violence. There were records like The Message from 84 by Grandmaster.
Bro is cooking here, real talk.
Master Flash that dealt with social reality. But the intensity of violence in rap music is directly related to the intensity of violence in the Black community. And you can see it record by record. I can make, if I had the time, I could make a chart that would show you exactly the amount of violence, the incarceration of young Black men, and the degree, a number of gangster rap records that began being created.
And he says so much more. I'll drop the link for that too. But what's interesting, you know, what I loved about that was gangster rap in and of itself wasn't it was like sociology. The conditions that these laws and these policies created and these economic opportunities created built what gangster rap is. H. Rap Brown and them said it different in the 70s because the circumstances were different. Huey Newton and them said it different in the 60s, in the late 60s and the 70s. It was different. Stokely Carmichael said it different during his time. But because these are the engines that are driving this is the reality. Now, of course, you put entertainment in that, you put money in that, it changes it. But it's saying you can't take gangster rap in and of itself without taking out the forces that created the circumstances that put a young man in a position to have to pick up crack, to have to pick up a gun, or the laws that brought crack into that community, or the mass incarceration, or the laws that put you in prison. So I'm leaving now. I leave prison with this perspective. We're going with it. Saw this happen to my uncle, my brother, my mama, my cousin. So it put more context to what gangster rap was. And then finally today, we're going to talk about the Million Man March. The Million Man March was a call to action by Minister Farrakhan and those who were tired of dealing with the abuses of the Reagan era, of the Bush and Clinton era, and said, we got to find a way to stop killing each other. We got to get on the same page. We got to get on the same mode. And in 1995, and I wish somebody in my life was able to take me at that age. But I'm gonna play this video first, and then we're gonna talk about it a little bit. So, Million Man March.
You're looking at history. Black history. These images aren't AI. On October 16th, 1995, 1 million Black men gathered on the National Mall in Washington, D.C. for an historic day of unity and atonement. They came by plane, train, bus from all over the country.
San Francisco.
Fairbanks, Alaska.
What prompted you to get on a bus and sit for 13 hours to come to Washington, D.C. today?
Well, I came out because of the unity for Black men.
What do you hope to take away from this?
Well, I hope to take back to where I come from, the spirit of 1 million men out here.
You know, at that time, you know, it's a song that I've been playing for my kids, and they love it now, called "Don't Believe the Hype" by Public Enemy on, I think it's either the Fear of the Black Planet album or It Takes a Million. I think it's It Takes a Million. No, it is Fear of a Black Planet album. Don't like Black men aren't either dope dealers, dope pushers, pimps, or criminals. Don't believe the hype. And this was, you know, a version of embodying that.
While some predicted violence, there wasn't any. The Million Man March was full of speeches by various social and political leaders who urged Black men to live their lives in a righteous way. Among the speakers that day, Maya Angelou, Rosa Parks, Stevie Wonder, and organizer Louis Farrakhan.
As an African American woman, I am proud, applaud, and support our men in this assemblage.
The ancestors remind us, despite the history of pain, we are going on people who will rise again, and still we rise. All for one, one for all. Clean up, black man, and the world will respect and honor you.
Even the Bloods.
You know, I want to stop it there. I think that's so important. Like, this was a time of intergenerational connection. There was such a problem between what hip hop was doing, what these young men was doing, where the plight of these men were coming from. We're talking about people going in and out of prison. We talk people in and out of work, in and out of life. So having this moment was very, very important to, you know, our plight at that time.
And the Crips came together at the Million Man March to preach unity.
Killing black brothers, it ain't gonna happen no more. We're tired of the killing. It's gonna stop, it will stop, and it must stop.
Black man, I come to you with much love. As we brothers on the West Coast made peace, me, myself, I was taking lives, but now I'm saving lives. Out of my heart, before I go, young brothers, let me hear you say this one time. Keep the Million Man March alive, young brothers only.
And this is the first time I ever attended something of this magnitude, and I'm really impressed with the way the black brothers have gotten together with no incidents. Everything is so calm. We have shown today that we can come together in the masses with a peaceful demonstration with no incidents at all, and it's wonderful. So if America...
Just the fact that they were able to do that says a lot. You know, America made you think that this was going to be a bloodbath, but it wasn't. And even the gangs from the West Coast said, you know, we need to have, you know, a truce and maneuver through this a little bit better, man.
They haven't learned anything at all is that they have judged the black man wrong.
Black man, do what you must to support your own. Do what you must to become related to your God. Do what you must to lift up your communities by the initiative that God has placed in your heart to do for yourself, and not beg others to do for you what you must do for yourself.
When this mindset change, then we win, because we have the economic.
Shout out to Dick Gregory.
Power.
We're all coming together like this. It's a black thing. It's nothing about, you know, Haitian, Jamaican, or, you know, North, South, West. We all come together to do this because we're in a crisis, and we need to let each other know that we are in this crisis together. You know, whether I'm doing good or he's doing bad, doesn't matter, because we're in this together, because we share that common bond.
What do you think the main message of this march is?
That we need to wake up. That we all need to wake up. That, you know, we're dying here. We're dying here, and we need to wake up. And to me, that's the message.
You support Louis Farrakhan?
I mean, how could you not support someone who's doing something like this? He's uplifting his race.
You see how slick they was trying to be? Oh, do you support? I'm here, man. Of course I'm supporting this brother. Yeah, 95 was one of the biggest.
What do you think about the Million Man March?
It's great.
96, there's a couple of 98.
I'm proud to be here. I'm proud that my father brought me out here. This is history in the making.
What do you hope to take away from this?
I hope that the community will be able to heal change, like we live a better life, that people won't be scared to step outside without something happening. The black people will come out here for unity and like to get together like this. The blacks, we should just come together all the time.
It's a great feeling.
I was probably close to his age at that time. 95, I was in 7th grade, so yeah.
And this feeling will go back, and it will be carried back home, and you feel it.
Our history must not be forgotten or erased. The 1995 Million Man March was one of the largest peacetime gatherings in American history.
Yeah, I'll stop it there. But yeah, so like, you know, so when we think about the Million Man March, I wanted to play that video. I didn't want to explain away that. I really wanted us to look at what it was and what it meant. I think it's time for another one. Real talk, I think it's time, and I would take both of mine with me. Yeah, the Source Awards did. They really did. If you go back, if you go right on YouTube and type in the Source Awards from 95, you can watch the whole thing. I watched it earlier this week when I was out of town. Crazy. And that's why people was mad when Outkast won Best New Artist, because it was so many. Nas was nominated in that category. You know what I'm saying? Illmatic was at 5 mics. But we all know Outkast was formidable there. So yeah, but I wanted to show this because I wanted to ensure that we had a really good standing for, regardless of what happened and all this other stuff, we still were able to come together and try to move our path forward. Next week, we'll talk about the Million Women March that happened in Philadelphia in 1997, in addition to the other things that happened, you know, as we move forward. So yeah, so, you know, the catalyst, you know, with everything going on, we needed to have a place for us to come together. And you can watch the movie Get on the Bus by Spike Lee, and it'll give you a little more. And that day was a very impactful day. And it was, yep, Pac was locked up. Yep. Because even Suge was like, hold your head. We riding with you. And he would be home. This happened in March. He was home by, I think it was September. So, yep. Let's see. Oh, so between the crime bill in 94, hip hop, you know, becoming a money maker. Oh, I appreciate you, bro. I appreciate that, man. Real talk. Hip hop becoming a staple in movies, on TV, and in albums. You know, it was just a boom. The era had a lot of big contradictions between what you could get and what the laws wouldn't allow. The economic paradox between those who were the hardest hit in the Black community versus those who were, you know, able to kind of maneuver, the identity struggles between the middle class, and just the collective spirit of a people. So it's, you know, this time was very interesting, and going from 1980 when we started to where we are in the mid 90s now, as we get to our last 3 classes, we'll see how the rest of this story plays out. So again, regulators, this week was really about how, you know, we rewrote order in these cultural times. You know, we have a lot of things we can reflect on, how our cultural expression, you know, was able to navigate, how we maybe fumbled the bag on the East Coast, West Coast war that cost us 2 of our greatest legends in the culture. And as we go forward to next week, we look at how, 96 and 97, how we end up, you know, the impacts of this crime bill, how hip hop falls with the loss of Pac and Big, and how it rebounds in its shiny suit. The Puff and the Mace era during that time, and then you know, how we move forward culturally, politically, and socially. Back then, they blamed everything on gangster rap, and look back, and it wasn't all positive, but it was reality rap, facts. And that's a big part of the class, homie, because when you got crack, when you got Reaganomics, when you got the war on drugs, when you got mass incarceration, when you got lack of opportunities, but then you only give people a chance to tell stories through the music, they're going to tell you what was going on during that time. So you're 100% right. Hip hop did change after Pac. After Pac died, it went shiny suit with Puff and them. And then DMX brought it back to kind of this grittiness. And then Eminem came, and then that changed what hip hop was, you know, for the foreseeable future. So absolutely, I can't wait to keep you involved in this class, man. I love the discussion. So next week we talk 1996, 1997. Should be a good conversation. I appreciate everybody for their time, their feedback, and their attention to this class. We're gonna keep doing this for the next couple of weeks. Let's continue to fight the power. Let's continue to navigate and move forward. Let's do our things. Didn't understand the era of pay homage to the 70s. Yep, exactly. I appreciate y'all, man. We're gonna be back next week. As Russell would say at the end of Def Jam, thanks for coming out. God bless. Good night. If you want to keep the conversation going, hit me up on my YouTube page or on my Facebook page, and I continue to come and spit the real. And I'm glad you found it too, big dog. I can't wait to keep the interaction going. All right, y'all. Peace.